let's move on now to Ukraine, obviously. Actually, it's been nice to not have to open the show with Ukraine, to actually bring some people some good news. But let's get to how exactly things are faring on the battlefield and any of the bigger diplomatic updates. So our friend at SimTac continued to have some of the best maps in the game here. Let's put this up there on the screen. So in terms of what's happening with Kyiv, that's where we're going to focus the bulk of our attention. There's been a lot made. Are they withdrawing? And is it strategic? And did they plan it all along or not? So the Ukrainian military has managed to secure some of these territories northwest of Kyiv, up near the Belarusian border, and Ukrainian forces continue to clear individual localities behind the withdrawing Russian forces. You can see, for those who are watching just on the screen, those red arrows up into Belarus and into Russian territory. Now, at the same time, though, that doesn't mean that there isn't an offensive all the way in the eastern part of the country, predominantly around the Donbas region, which is where a lot of the trouble has started. Now, before we get to the specifics of that, Michael Kaufman, the analyst that we both deeply respect, had two long threads on the context of where the war is that I think are really worth parsing and going through for everybody for trying to understand what's happening. Let's put this up there on the screen, please, which is that what Michael points to is that in terms of the map and the progress of forces, he says that it kind of splits the difference here, which is that it seems certain that the Russians definitely did want to take Kyiv, but that doesn't mean that they have not still the ability in order to fight to some sort of stalemate or in order even possibly offensively in the Donbas region. Really what he points to is that Putin has put himself into a real bind. And the reason why is that the bind has been made by Putin calling this a special operation. And by calling it a special operation, he's only been able to bring some of his ultimate force to bear. The problem is think of it this way. Russia is fighting this war with 15 to 20% of its operational capacity. However, the Ukrainians are fighting this with 100% of their operational capacity, both in terms of war, also in terms of civilian buy-in. Put the next thread up there, please, on the screen. And we'll have links down there just so everybody can go and watch it. What I find is the most important thing here that Michael points to is that for Putin, in order to, quote unquote, scale up operations, here's what he has to do. Russia can get more battalions, but without a national mobilization, its ability to pursue the war beyond the Donbas looks very circumspect, and it can't get more units quickly. Right now, the Russian military has to fight largely with what it has managed to put together. That's a problem for when you want to conduct a national-scale military operation on the entire country of Ukraine, which is the largest country in Europe. A lot of people forget that. Yeah. So what it means is that the limited war aims could be, and again, this is a big could be such that what the Russians want to do is retreat / focus all of their efforts on securing the Donbas region in the eastern part of the country in order to then get concessions from Zelensky in terms of a neutrality declaration. Yes, we're going to give you Donetsk, and they may not say it, but they're not going to fight over it. Yes, we will officially recognize Crimea, kind of with a stalemate that we actually were in, and then maybe we can just see some sort of ceasefire come about. But I found those two threads very revealing. In number one, that the Russians, because they've hamstrung themselves by not declaring this a war, declaring it a special operation, they really are not able to bring the full force of military power to bear. And number two, that politically it's dicey in terms of whether Putin could pull off this full-scale national mobilization. It reminds me a lot of past Russian campaigns, Afghanistan, Finland, and more, sold to the public in much the same way. Unless you have total buy-in, it's not really capable of fighting it fully to the extent that you need to, which is why they were able to do that when Hitler invaded.
Yeah, so you have a couple of things going on. First of all, it's very clear you now have a refocusing of the fight in the eastern region of Ukraine. There was a sort of countertake that we brought you last week of perhaps it was always intentional that the threat to take Kyiv was kind of like a fake out move.
Right.
I'm not sure if I buy that, but that is an alternative interpretation
I think it's
here.
Worth hearing.
Yeah, it's worth putting out there that that's an alternative interpretation. Most analysts, though, are saying that basically, look, they haven't been able to achieve their maximalist political aims here. So now they're focusing on their sort of core strategic objectives, and that, the Ukrainian forces, they have fought extraordinarily well, and they've been supplied with, incredible amounts of weapons by us and by the West. But they've sustained losses as well. And so now the fight moves to eastern and southern Ukraine, and we'll see what this next phase of the war ultimately looks like. You have a very difficult political bind for Putin, as you laid out, because he hasn't been honest at all with his public about what this is. And so it makes it very hard to go to them and say, we've got to mobilize for a war effort, when they're like, what war?
Yes.
This is, right?
There's
Like,
no war.
what are you talking about? There's no war. So that's his bind. And then Zelensky has his own bind, which is that, Ukrainians really feel like they're able to out and out win this, which makes it very difficult to sell any sort of negotiated agreement and settlement to the public. So that's why sometimes when you hear him talk, he's kind of all over the place. Sometimes it's very conciliatory. It really depends on the audience. Very conciliatory. Listen, we're willing to, let's talk about neutral status. Listen, we know that we aren't going to use arms to try to take back the regions like Crimea and Donetsk that you've occupied. And sometimes you hear the language, which you did this weekend on the Sunday shows, of this is a genocide and we've got to be all in and we're not going to give up an inch of territory. So that's the balancing act that he's having to deal with here. And so right now we're just waiting to see, how this all shakes out and what it looks like once they refocus on the eastern part of the country.
There's just no way to know.
Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.